talk about mornings on the Cape Cod Canal. All right, I like to tell stories. Some people tell more stories than I do, but I tell my share. I spend 100 days a year fishing the Cape Cod Canal. A good fisherman is an observer of everything around them. It's not a fishing talk, it's an observation talk. Primarily April to November travelogue of the beauty of the Cape Cod Canal, and here are my observations. My canal story, it's beautiful. Ever-changing, we have weather, creatures, morning and night, and every picture tells a story. To take this shot, actually, I saw the sun coming up. I love these flowers in the foreground, and I actually laid down on the ground to take this shot to make sure that I got the flowers in the foreground and everything else in the background. All right, next. I always see something new. I'm riding my bike along the canal, maybe in June, and there's a yucca plant. I mean, you think of Florida, you think of Arizona, that's where you think you're going to see a yucca. No, actually, lots of yucca plants around here, and very, very pretty. So, now, fog. Fog's constantly at play in our Cape Cod Canal. Warm summer air, cold water, foggy mornings. And I love foggy mornings. The fog comes, goes with the wind and current. Sometimes it just sits right in the canal. Sometimes when the current shifts, it starts to move in one way or the other. It sweeps in and out of the canal. It's actually just a wonderful thing to watch just by itself. The sun rises, ultimately the fog burns off. So, foggy morning on the Cape Cod Canal. That sunrise, obviously, one of the bridges, that one's a hard one to tell. I think that's the Sag, though, judging from how close the shore is to with the fishermen. Next. Within an hour or two, we'll go from a scene like that fog to bright blue sky. Sometimes I get caught in the shower when I'm fishing, and the beauty of that is we end up with a rainbow. Sunrises. My 100 days usually start sometime around 3:30 in the morning when I meet the people I'm going to fish with. My day might be over by 7 a.m. But I see a lot of pre-dawn, dawn, sunrises. So I got a few photos to show. Pre-dawn. That's looking east. I'm near the Sagamore Bridge, looking down toward probably Fisherman's View, and maybe that might be even some boats down at the end over near Sandwich Marina. I like this photo because I feel like you can just sort of dive right into that little blue piece in the center. But that's the low, that's where you can't tell, is that fog or is that cloud? Next. Probably from this is another photo, obviously of a sunrise. We get a very golden glow on the water all the time, and sunlight. You love to have clouds at sunrise because it really creates a lot of interesting colors. Maxfield Parish sunrise. You know, you look for that blue, those puffy clouds, a little bit of gold. Bridges. We've got basically 3 major bridges here, but the fog might affect them. Some morning it's dead calm, which creates great reflections in the water. And the lights were still on, but sun hadn't come up yet, but the lights were still on the bridge. Next. get some great reflections as the sun comes up. Next. Again, the light plays on the water all the time. And the Sagamore Bridge, you know, some mornings the sky is on fire. I know, John Doble and a bunch of really good photographers take great sunset photos. You see them on the Born Facebook page, Born Photographer page. The sky lights up a lot at night for sunset. I rarely take any sunset pictures, but boy, I have a lot of sunrise pictures. Next, and we have, as mentioned, the bridges. We have three major bridges: the Bourne, the Sagamore, and the Railroad Bridge. Here's a shot of the energy train coming back on the Cape. Boats and ships. Canal was built for commerce. 1909 to July 29, 1914, August Belmont financed the building of the Cape Cod Canal. In 1928, he built to make money by charging tolls for people so they didn't have to go around the Cape, cut down on shipwrecks. In 1928, the Corps of Engineers paid $11.5 million and bought it. They built the three bridges in a 2-year time span between 33 and 35. And we still have those three bridges today. 20,000 vessels transit the canal annually. Pleasure craft, by far the most abundant craft we see. Great sailing vessels, tankers, barges, working vessels, and cruise ships. So I've got a few shots of those. The pleasure craft. Now, I'm not a boat guy, but I will tell you, I will bet boat people really think that's a good-looking ship. And nice and that is a serious motor yacht. Next. Now, we have historic sailing vessels. I use an app called Marine Traffic, free app, and it will tell you what ships are anywhere in the world. Basically, you pull it up, you can be standing next to the canal, and you zero it in so you see what, it gives little images of toy boats, and you click on one, it will tell you what ship that is. And you can follow them. You can zoom out far enough. I was following the Mayflower coming into the canal several months ago. And it was waiting there between New Bedford and Cunningham for the tide to turn, and it was on its way back to Plymouth. And I could trace where it was going to be, all the way along until it finally showed up in front of me. So marine traffic is great. So if you have it and you see a ship you want to know what it is, you can click on the app, find it right there in front of you, and then a couple more clicks will show you the size, when it was built, information about where it's coming from, where it's going. Nice little app. So this is the Mayflower. This was actually 3 years ago, she was docked at the Mass Maritime Academy. And then this spring, when she was coming from her recent refurbishment at Nista in Connecticut, I caught her coming up the canal. The beauty is the little tugboat that pulls her stays far enough ahead that you can get a nice shot of the Mayflower without a tug, if you're so inclined. This is the Kalmar Nickel. This is the Swedish Mayflower. This is a reproduction of a ship. This one was built in 1998, and it's a reproduction of a 1628 ship that brought the Swedish to Wilmington, Delaware, to settle. And I've seen the Calamar nickel multiple times. And some people just recently took a boat trip on her from Provincetown. Then she went out for a sail. And then, so she's very noticeable because of the bright blue on the sides. And the same day I saw the Calamar nickel last summer, I was actually out on Todd's boat. And we were just at the west end of the canal, and the Santa Maria comes by. And there's a lot of history right there. All right. Then we have, in addition to sailing vessels, commerce and education. Oceanus Leader. It's an RORO, like maybe a row-row. Roll on, roll off. About 2,000 automobiles fit on that ship. And that's the ramp. And it carries me. What's spooky about a ship this big? Hardly any wake, hardly any waves, hardly any noise. You're out there at 3 in the morning, all of a sudden, there are no lights coming across the canal. Well, the canal has blue lights every 5 poles. And basically the whole sky gets filled by one of these ships silently going by. Pretty spooky, actually. Now, the Weeks crane, 533. It's probably the world's most famous crane. And I'll tell you why it's considered that. She can lift 500 short tons. She has a boom, when fully extended, is 210 feet. The 3 biggest lifts that I'm aware of that she did was when Sully, the U.S. Airways pilot, landed the plane in the Hudson River. While it was still floating, the Weeks crane is the one that plucked it out of the water. Also on the Hudson River is the aircraft carrier Intrepid. And on the Intrepid is the Space Shuttle Endeavour and the SST Concorde. And both of them were lifted onto the deck from floating barges onto the deck of the Intrepid by Weeks crane number 533. Hence probably the most famous crane in the world. Now this is the Weeks has multiple cranes. The fog is starting to lift here, but I've had this crane. This crane came by, and there was a break in the fog, but you couldn't hear it. You could hear something coming, and all of a sudden she just appeared out of the fog, and I swear she was going to run aground. She was that close to the shore. And they brought a couple of these cranes down when they refurbished the power plant at the east end, and they put a natural gas generator on the end, and they had to get part of that structure off a barge and over to the next to the power plant. And just one of these Weeks cranes lifted it off the barge and got it onto a trailer there. So, impressive machines. Probably the ship that we see most often. I would bet I see this ship at least once a week on average, sometimes two. This is a Great Eastern. It's a chemical/oil tanker, and what's always notable about her is she's always puffing a lot of steam or smoke. She comes through heading north pretty full, and when she comes back through the canal heading southwest, she's usually pretty empty. And you can see she's not drawing much water. She's sitting pretty high. But that's, you can always see what she's doing And what I liked about this is where I happened to be, she happened to be picking up that morning sun. And if you were familiar with Mass Maritime Academy, know their last training ship was the T.S. Kennedy. And a new one is coming. They rebuilt the docks. The date, whether it comes in this fall, makes it this fall, I'm not sure. But the T.S. Kennedy is now in Texas, and the Texas A&M logo is now on the side of the ship, even when she came back for the most recent cruise. So very quickly, the Mass Maritime kids covered up the Texas A&M logo. Again, we're lucky enough to live near Woods Hole. Woods Hole has multiple research vessels. So we see a lot of research vessels come through the canal. This is the O-Search. And so, yeah, they're constantly coming by. Every June, I think it's June, they have Fleet Week up in Boston. And when you're out on the canal in the morning and you see one of these, you know you're going to see 4 or 5 more behind it. And this one is YP for Yard Patrol, 705. I know there's a 703, a 708, a 709, a 706. They all come through. It's a pretty good sized ship. It's not huge by any means, but it's really, these are cadets from Annapolis, primarily in training, coming up. And what was funny, go back to that for a second. What was funny about that one is it happened to be a day that I'm fishing near the west end of the canal. And there are some fish around. When you're fishing at the west end of the canal, sometimes people in boats try to creep into the canal, even though boats aren't supposed to fish in the canal. So sometimes the canal patrol boat chases them out. But I'll tell you, when these yard patrol boats came, I never saw those anglers in their boats scatter as fast as when they saw these YPs coming through. Yeah, we've got our cruise ships. This is the latest addition to the canal cruises. This is the Mohegan. It came last year. We replaced the Viking. I've done the Viking canal cruise where they will give you a little talk about the canal, how it was built, when it was built, what you see along the shores, and it goes out onset. It's a very good trip to take. So now the Mohegan actually is doing that trick. I have not been on the booze cruise, I have not been on the dance cruise, but I've been on the tourist cruise. But that's the Mohegan. One morning I'm leaving the canal, I see a boat in the distance, and that's a pretty good sized cruise ship. I want to see what this one is. So this one is the World. I don't know if anybody's read about the World. It is a cruise ship condominium. So all of these cabins are condominiums, and people fly to meet the boat, you know, and whatever port it's in, and then they cruise for a while, and then leave the boat and fly back home. And there are some people that actually live and work year-round on the boat wherever it's cruising. So that's the World. I believe when I read the statistics, in order to buy a cabin on the World, you have to have a provable net worth of over $10 million. There's a cruise ship heading west at night. I'm fishing near the railroad bridge. As you can see, this is actually very much in focus because the bridge isn't moving. The ship is flying. I picked this one up out of the corner of my eye when she came under the Bourne Bridge, and she was just steaming west. By the time I really got a good picture, this was the clearest I could get. But it's fuzzy because she's moving that fast. Sometimes you only catch a glance, but I like this photo because it's only a glance. But I get the beachway sign, so this is over in Gray Gables by the beachway to Fisherman's Beach, Beachway to Fisherman's Beach. You know, she's heading west. I rolled down my window and got a quick camera shot, but I kind of like that. And as we know the old phrase, like ships passing in the night. This one's just sort of steaming one way, she's steaming west. All right. Now, the canal serves many purposes. It was built to promote commerce and ship traffic. There were lots of shipwrecks off the outer cape. They thought, even Miles Standish thought they should have a canal. Then what happened was they built this canal, and there were German U-boats off the coast in the early in the late 20s, early 30s. There were other potential issues, so the Army Corps of Engineers bought the canal, and it's a so they bought it. And it's also a 7-mile long park, biking, walking, fishing, and boating. And everybody in this room has probably done one of those things along the canal. And if you haven't, you should. It's great, but it created an environment, an ecosystem that's ideal for fish, birds, mammals, and crustaceans. So we got some birds. Great blue heron. There were days where I'll count 24 blue heron as I'm riding my bike along the canal. And beautiful bird, and they squawk when you disturb them. You ride your bike by and they get out of there and they're squawking. Next, belted kingfishers. They also squawk. They're territorial. They're little. I mean, they're only about yay big. And, but they're really very loud, very aggressive, and they're fun to watch feed. Next, peregrine falcons. They own the sky. That's how pretty they are. We are lucky here under the Bourne Bridge in the past, but especially under the Sagamore Bridge. I was under the Sagamore Bridge, I could hear all this squawking about a month ago. And luckily I saw a photographer. One of the things that I observe is, I like to observe people who are observing. Whenever you see one of these people with a photographer, with a camera, with a lens about that long on it, what you want to do is look in the direction that lens is pointing. Or you can go over and chat with them, because they're great. And they were telling me all about the peregrine falcons. There were two. You see the mother and the father, and they had two young peregrine falcons, and they were squawking because they were hungry. And they had been monitoring them for a while. I happened to be standing next to them, and I saw one of them, as these photographers who saw them every day said, so I witnessed the first flight of one of these peregrine falcons. Well, the other one was still jumping up and down. There were pipes under the bridges. It was running along, jumping up and down on the pipe, getting ready to think about flying. But that was pretty neat. Ospreys. My favorite sound in the morning, other than breaking fish, is ospreys calling to one another. It's a very distinctive cry, and if one of them spots a fish, they start crying out to the other ones. And these ospreys, they have a 5-foot wingspan. They can dive feet first. They come down in full speed dive. They go on feet first. They hit the fish. They go totally underneath the water. Then they pop up. When they start flapping their wings, they get about 3 flaps clear of the water, and then they sort of, almost like a plane stalling. They stop in place, they go like that, they shake the water off their feathers, and they take off. And right after they do that, then they reposition the fish that they've got so that the fish is directly in line with where they're going. They're perfectly aerodynamic. They're fabulous creatures. We also have unique creatures. They have the long-tailed duck, that's the female, and loons. It's not just lakes in Maine that have loons. We have lots of loons in the Cape Cod Canal. I pretty much see them year-round, and I hear them, and it is a very haunting sound that the loons make. Next. All right. This is a black crowned night heron. Very terrible shot, but that shot's taken about 3:30 in the morning. There's no ambient light. But typically, I'll see the black crowned night herons typically near a tuxen, right along where all those trees are. That's where I've seen more than anywhere else on the canal. Next. Taking the kids for a walk. That's at Bell Road. We're at the parking lot there. The ducks, these geese just pumped out and want to parade their kids. Across from Mass Maritime, several families of geese. And this is off Grey Gables, another family of geese. I've got other photos, but not here, of them just sort of, they bring them over to the weeds at the edge of the canal and they let the kids go nuts and eat. So it's like the salad bar. All right. In addition to those are all local birds, that pretty much local birds that I showed you. Now we'll go to some visitors from afar. This is a black-headed gull. It's different than the laughing gulls that we get that also have black heads. This one here comes, it's in Europe, it's in northern Canada, and a little bit down our coast. And we went looking for this because you read the bird reports from eBird and other places where different sightings are. And all of a sudden you'll start to see people show up in places. And they reported this particular gull. We looked everywhere for this gull. We got back in our car, and this is the parking lot just east of the Sagamore Bridge on the mainland side. And the gull decided to sit down on the fence post in front of us. West Coast bird. It's a Townsend warbler. This was up on Savory Ave in Sagamore Beach. Read all about that, started going looking for it. Again, that's an idea of observing the observers. When I saw half a dozen folks with their big cameras looking in somebody's backyard on Savory Ave, and I recognized one of these, Phil Kyle, who's one of the best birders on the Cape, was there, and they pointed, oh, it's in that bush over there. Sure enough, I got my lifeless Townsend warbler. November to May, we have thousands of common iders. If you go by Bell Road especially, after November and through April, you'll hear them. They're almost like little dogs barking or squawking. There are tons of them around, and what's interesting about them, they nest in the Arctic tundra. They feed on mussels when they're here because that's what they can do. They actually can dive 60 feet and collect mussels. The canal average depth in the channel is 35 feet, so they have no problem at all getting down and having a nice lunch. Next. So there's the common eider, of which there are thousands. And then there is the king eider, and this actually is a photo of a photo I took. And this one was by the herring run. We got the reports. I went chasing, Tina and I went chasing down there with the binoculars and the good camera. Sure enough, we got our common eider lifeless bird. There have been a couple of, maybe every year there's a report of one or two in the canal. So they're really special to get and see. And they are beautiful. Seals and other mammals. The white-chinned mink. if you've ever been to the canal, sometimes you will see them run across the canal access road, or I've seen them actually jump into the water, catch a little fish, bring it up to the family, and down in the rocks. They live down in the rocks. They were imported here many years ago to eradicate the rat population. And I heard that you used to have a lot of rats in the rocks of the canal. Those are pretty much gone. It's all mink. And they're actually kind of cute. Sometimes they'll run across my wading boots. And, but they're very active. They're cute. Then we have a seal. And this one, like all seals, is waiting to steal a fish. There is one. That's the seal head. That is a probably 20-pound striped bass. The cute predator of the canal. There is one, there's a striped bass with his skin torn off, and that's the seal head, and he is dining on that nice striped bass. And that sometimes they will catch a striped bass in front of you and eat it right in front of you just to make you feel bad, especially if you're not catching it. And that's why we root for the Great Lakes. All right, lobsters in the Cape Cod Canal. How many people here knew there was lobsters in the canal? All right, that's half. That's good. All right, so there's lobsters in the canal. This is my friend Tim opening a lobster pot. All right, Tim's actually right there at the back of the room now. But so he lobsters in the Cape Cod Canal. So they thank him for the photo. All right, next. So he's measuring the fish, but they have to be legal. And they have a measuring device to measure the carapace, which is a big part of the shell in the back. There's all this equipment, probably a bucket for bait, a bucket for lobsters. This long pole has a little float on the end, and that's used to help put the trap back in the water where it's out of reach. And they typically harvest it high tide, and I think they're putting it back in the water then?
Low tide, yeah.
Yeah. Or are you getting it?
Yeah. That looks like it's going back in.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So that's going back in. And believe me, you don't see them. You'll see people, you'll see ropes or cable or something attached to these traps all along the canal. And the traps, it's not like the traps aren't marked with buoys like you'd see in Maine or in Boston Harbor. They're done underneath. Typically, we find them with our fishing lures because we will catch a lure on a trap. Or, even worse, I've had a fish, a very nice fish, cut my line off on a trap. But it wasn't one of Tim's.
Question. Are you allowed to use your boat to harvest and plant them, or do you have to do them from the shore? No boating.
It's all shore and it's hard work.
Yeah. My brother mentioned that there were lots of traps in the canal. I walked in the section and I never see them, but I don't know what to look for.
Yeah, typically you won't see them because they get poached. So people try to use dark lines so you can't see them among the rocks. They might have them right at the edge of the line so they can only see the line at low tide.
Yeah. Occasionally you see a trap up on the rocks.
Pardon? Yes.
Occasionally you see one up on the rocks.
Right. Yes. All right, so there's 2 diners and 3 lobsters getting ready for lunch. There is steamed and ready. I knew the light would be perfect in here for slides, so I wanted something that was nice and bright and really hot. So I figured a nice red lobster would pop. So I've picked these lobsters. I have lobster meat, and we have lobster 3 legs. All on the classic New England hot dog roll. And then 2 of these are butter grilled lobster in butter. The other one is lobster and my brother-in-law's favorite, Miracle Whip. And I also made myself some lobster with mayonnaise and celery. So lobster 3 ways. And I said it wasn't a fishing talk, but you can't talk about the canal without mentioning fishing. So, in Buzzard's Bay, there was this great statue, a group of folks, the Stan Gibbs Fishing Club. They raised the money, they bought the statue, they erected the statue. It's over near the railroad bridge. It is really a wonderful piece of art, and it does really hark back to the current and past of the Cape Cod Canal, which we're fortunate to live here, but it really is the mecca of striped bass fishing in the United States. Everybody wants to come here and fish the canal. And that's probably would be a 25 to 35 pound striper. He's got 2. Just a great photo. It's a great statue. It is a fisherman with a fish. And this is why I get up and spend 4 to 7 a.m. on the canal. All right. Any questions?
Now, when a big ship comes by and you're fishing, doesn't it wreck the fishing for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes? And that
Actually, 2 or 3 things. One, when certain big ships go by, what happens is the water actually, if you're standing in the water or at the edge, the water will get sucked, and about a foot of water might actually get sucked right back toward the ship. And then that will eventually come in. And over by Bell Road, there's that tidal flats area. I've seen people out there standing and almost get dragged into the canal because it gets like a waterfall. As that water rushes out to catch up to that ship, it's being sucked out by the fish. So the big ships, I'm not sure about the timing, and the people here who might be able to answer it even better than I. But I tend to always cast immediately in the wake of other boats that go by. My theory is that striped bass are very large and stable fish. So they don't get rocked around very much by waves or weights, whereas bait fish is very unstable and just goes like that. And a striped bass wants to eat something that's disoriented and doesn't look like it knows where it's going. So I've caught many a fish casting right behind a ship or a boat that's gone by. Do you have a theory on that?
You know it. You've known that for years.
Yeah. So you cast behind it, he expects, same theory. That water is disordered, even by the bigger ship, the water is moving around, bait's getting scattered and being attacked. Next.
Yeah. One of those earlier pictures, 3 a.m., showed light poles. Are all the poles with lights, or every so many?
It's every 5th pole, in theory. If you really count them, sometimes it's 4. But there are poles, there are a few poles that are missing on the Cape side. There's a pole at 15, there's a pole at 40, there's poles at 50, then there's the cut for the gas tanks. But then from 65 to 370, every 5th pole in theory has a light on the Cape side. Mainland side, it's a little bit longer, and there are lights approximately every 5th pole, and they're numbered every 5th pole. But there are 2 pole 50s on the mainland side.
Do most of those pole numbers reference the distance?
To what?
Do most of those poles reference the distance from one end of the canal to the other?
Yeah, they're pretty much, and you know, I've tried to actually calculate, so there's 370 poles in 6.5 miles. So if you do the math, but they're not exact, and they weren't there to They were more there for reporting purposes than to be an accurate measure of distance.
So 7 miles would be 36,960 feet.
Yeah, no, well, it's only the light poles the light poles themselves, which are the ones we count, are, or that we measure. It's for every fifth pole is a light pole. And so we refer to things as being at 370, or 340, or 40, or 15, or pole 20. And people know we don't meet. And people even get more exact, say, well, I'll meet you at pole 42, or 292. Any other questions?
Is
Yes.
there one particular spot on the canal that's the best for fishing, or is it really where the fish want to be?
Who is it?
Is there one particular spot on the canal that's best for fishing?
It's usually the place Kevin's at. You know, we all have our days, we all have our locations. Since the canal has current, and every 6 hours it's changing direction, and it has different things on the bottom. So the currents, there are eddies, there are other things that are happening that different times of the current will make a different location a better location than another location. So there's no one best place. There's lots of different places, and it's really primarily dependent on the current.
The other question, the tide chart will show the canal, high tide, it's about 2 hour difference between maybe the east end and the west end. If that's said maybe in Buzzards Bay, opposed to,
They do the tide on the canal, on the chart. There are a couple of things. I won't get too technical, but just enough. The sandwich, it has a 9-foot tide, which means that low tide and high tide are 9 feet different in terms of height. The west end by Bell Road is only a 4-foot tide. So it's not moving as much. And you're right, there is a different time where it could be low tide at Bell Road. It's high tide, it's higher tide coming that way, and then it shifts. And you almost have to think of like those old boxes where they have water in them that would show wave action. So what happens is that west current, when the current's running west, the tide is actually dropping in the canal. But for the most part, for another hour after it turns back east, the current's still going down. And then it turns the other way. So when you're fishing and heading east, the tide is actually rising and moving that way. So most canal fishermen don't think in terms of high tide or low tide like a beach fisherman does or a boat fisherman does. We think of when does it turn? When does it turn at Bell Road or the railroad bridge? When does it turn in Sandwich? That indicates a lot of things to us as to where we want to fish, as in Jason's question. Historically, the last 2 hours of the west was a great place to be in the west. And then after it turned east, once you get an hour into the east, you'd start moving yourself east. But fish have fins, they don't read the rule books, they cheat, and they're not always where you think they're going to be.
so when you see the water running, I'm still confused. When you see the water running, I was out there last night at midnight.
Yeah.
Often taken, unlike you, taking a very evening stroll, quiet, beautiful. So you see some animal life there as well. I'm still confused about when the water is running east, if that's the way it looked like low tide was. And even after low tide was at around 12 or 4 a.m., it was still moving a little bit further, but it seemed like it was going east when it's going low.
Remember, there's a 6-hour, it's moving for 6 hours.
Yeah.
So you might already start seeing it heading east, but if you were near the west end of the canal, that tide may still be dropping, but the water's actually moving this way. Because it's lower, because it was lower over here where it was going to go to and fill up. So it moves. It moves. We think in terms of current moving direction to direction. Matter of fact, I was shocked recently to see the fishing and thinking, oh, it hasn't turned or it's turned, but the water is actually coming up. Because 90% of the time, low tide is after the tide turns east. Low tide in the west end is after the tide turns east. But once in a while, it turns before the water starts to rise before it turns.
So if it's heading west, is it heading out? The
If
tide's
it's heading
lower?
west, it's heading toward Buzzards Bay, and typically it's dropping. Think of 90% of the time, if the water's heading west, it's dropping. 90% of the time, if the water's heading east, it's rising.
Thank you.
So in the spring, when the stripers are coming from the south, they're migrating north. They're going from Buzzards Bay towards the Cape Cod Bay. Would that be the best time to fish on the west end? Because they're coming from the south?
You know, you would think that. And we think that, and yes, that's probably somewhat true, but 60% of the bass are coming, let's say even 50% come through the canal. A whole other bunch of fish actually go around Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, around the Cape, and they're coming into Buzzards Bay. So it's really what happens is they're following the herring, and they might follow the herring in from Cape Cod Bay, or they might follow the herring in the spring from Buzzards Bay. You would think that most of the time you would get more fish coming that way. Not always true. Anybody else? Jason?
Is it better to use lures or chunk bait on the canal?
Better to use lures or chunk bait in the canal.
I would say there are a few people that chunk bait in the canal. I would say 99% of the people that I fish with throw lures in the canal. Because of the current, there's only the window of throwing a chunk and not having it get stuck under a rock or get swung into shore. That window of opportunity is actually pretty short. Whereas a lure, you can cast it over here and you can work it all the way as the current drags it that way. So you can have more active time where the fish can hit it if you're working the lure.
I'm just curious, your lifestyle, do you get up also and?
No. That's an easy question.
So then you come home and sleep?
Yeah, I'll come home here once in a while. It depends on how many days in a row I fish hard. And I'll come home and maybe take an hour nap. As a matter of fact, a very good day would be I fish early, stop at Cumbies, get a decaf coffee, get home at 7:30, set my alarm for 9, have a good nap, get up at 9, start the coffee pot that I filled the night before, and say, your coffee is ready at 9:15. Now, in a perfect world, my fishing time does not eat into her time. The problem is when my butt starts to drag at about 8 o'clock at night and I'm starting to yawn and fall asleep. She reminds me my fishing time is eating into her time.
You enjoy it.
I enjoy it.
Okay.
And I love it.
All right.